So it has been almost 9 months since I finished the build on this DIY truck camper. It's crazy to think that it's been that long since I finished the build back in the spring, but during that time I've had a lot of time to think about things, and I've become increasingly aware of some of the mistakes that I made with this truck camper. So in this video, I want to go over some of the mistakes that I made, some of the issues that I encountered during this process, and the things that I'll definitely do differently if and when I build my next DIY truck camper. All right, so just a quick recap of this camper. I do have a number of videos that I did back in the spring when I was building it out, and a couple of other ones as well, so I will link to a few of those in the description below if you have not seen them. But just to sort of overview a little bit, like I said, I built this thing from scratch. It is made mostly of wood. I tried to make it as light as I possibly could. It is relatively lightweight overall. I think it comes in just over 600 pounds without, some of the appliances and stuff that I've added to it. I can't remember the exact weight off the top of my head, but I did make a video about that, so you can check that one out if you're interested. But it's relatively lightweight. The walls itself are almost like a sandwich composite structure. I did 1/4-inch plywood, XPS insulation, and 1/4-inch plywood on the other side with 2x2 framing for the studs in there, and glued it all together with a boatload of tight bond too, and let it sit, and that's what the walls are. They're pretty lightweight. And then the tub itself, this part of the camper, is made of 3/4-inch plywood here, and then actually the wings are only 1/2-inch plywood. So that's basically it for the for the build. I've got these little trim pieces on here with aluminum that I did just to sort of finish it out. It has solar on the roof. It's got the air conditioning unit with a relatively large battery bank in there, so that I was actually able to live in this thing for at least, part-time during the summer, which worked out really well for the most part. But let's get to some of the mistakes that I made with this camper. The first mistake is undoubtedly the biggest mistake that I made, and it starts right from where we're sitting right now. It is this door. This thing has been kind of a nightmare. I don't want to exaggerate. It hasn't been that bad, but there's been a couple of situations where it has been really, really bad. I had issues with this door from the day that I built it, and to be fair, this is my first ever DIY truck camper. It's the first time I ever framed anything out like this, and it's definitely the first door that I ever built on my own as well. But I had issues with it from day one, where I had an issue where I was trying to get the backstop and get it sealed properly, and I had to end up redoing it while I was building the camper. And for the most part, it's been okay, but there were a couple of situations this summer where we just had absolute torrential downpouring rain, which is quite normal in Florida in the summer, if any of you guys have ever been to Florida. And when that happens, I had water flowing into the inside of the camper. It only happened a couple of times, and I caught it very early, and I was able to dry it up, and it was fine. But it was a little stressful when that was happening, and it's because the door is just not perfect. It's not really a great door. I mean, you could actually see the gaps here. Those gaps are just a little bit too big. They're not what a normal door should look like. When I have this vent fan going on full blast inside, you can feel the drafts from the door. It's definitely not perfectly sealed, and a couple of times, like I said, I've had water get in. One thing that I did do is I added this little ledge, this aluminum ledge above the door, and that has helped to divert water coming off the back of the truck. It definitely has helped, but I did still have one other time where water came in, and if I were to do this again, I would probably just buy a pre-made RV door. There are tons of those out there. They're relatively expensive, and that's the reason that I didn't do it the first time. I just didn't want to, spend the $400 or $500. I was trying to cut corners and keep it as cheap as I could, and now I have to deal with a slightly leaky, kind of crappy door. But if I do it again, I would probably just buy a pre-made door. You frame it out, you stick it on there with some butyl tape like you're doing a vent fan or a window, and you don't really have any issues. So another reason why I built the door myself, though, and I want to address this right now because a lot of folks ask this question: if someone comes by in the middle of the night, some goofball, and closes the tailgate like this, a lot of folks ask, what happens? What are you doing there? Are you trapped? And I am not trapped. I can actually open this window here, and I can reach my arm out and pull the tailgate, and I can unlock it and drop it down. So that was the other reason why I built the door myself. I wanted to make sure that I could get the window in the door like this so that I could reach out and unlock it if, some goober comes by in the middle of the night and tries to lock me in here, plays a joke on me. So That's another reason. A lot of those pre-made RV doors, they don't have windows that can open, so I would really have to find the right one or get one custom or something like that. So I guess this kind of leads me to mistake number 2, which is the shape of the roof on this camper. This is something that I thought of when I was building it, but I just didn't really have the time to deal with it, so I just made it a flat roof. And it hasn't really been that much of a problem. My previous campers had flat roofs, that Rogue camper that I had, and even the Phoenix pop-up truck camper that I had as well. I mean, those were flat roofs, so I figured this one would be okay. But what happens when you have a perfectly flat roof is that when it rains and you get torrential rains like I was talking about earlier, all that water flows off into one spot. So if this camper is parked with the nose above the tail, that's when I have issues. If it is perfectly parked like that and perfectly level from side to side, then that water will flow directly off the back face of the truck, the back of it, and that's when I have issues with it flowing in through that back door. Now that I've realized that, I never park with the nose above the tail. I'm always trying to do the opposite if it's gonna rain, or I try to park on an angle from side to side so that the water will flow off one side of the camper or the other. But if I didn't have a flat roof, if I had made this roof a little bit taller in the back and a little bit shorter in the front so that it had a nice pitch to it, then I wouldn't have any of these issues because all the water would just flow off the front whenever it rained, and it would also be more aerodynamic as well. So for the exterior of this camper, I used kind of a different method to seal it. It's kind of an experimental method, I guess, but Durabac is a waterproof, water-resistant paint. It's used in marine applications, it's used on RVs, it's also used in commercial situations like lab floors and you know, warehouses and that sort of thing. But it's an extremely waterproof, very expensive paint, and I used it to do the exterior, and that's all I did. I mean, I sanded it down and then I applied this Durabac, and that was it. So overall, it's worked really well. You know, it has this nice finish to it. You know, it's not perfect, but it doesn't really seem to leak. Like, I'm not noticing a lot of water damage inside. But the one problem that I have had, and it may or may not be related to the paint itself, is that I painted this camper and then I cut the holes for the window, for the other window, for the vent fan, and for this shore power outlets, and that was a mistake. I should have cut those holes before I painted it. If I'd cut the holes first, got everything ready to go, and then gone and painted it, I think I would have sealed things a little bit better. The holes themselves would have been sealed a little better, and then I could have installed the windows with my butyl tape and this little shore power outlet, and I wouldn't have had this issue. But instead, what I'm having is, you know, this issue where there's a little bit of like delamination going on that first layer of the plywood, the 1/4-inch plywood on the outside. And I think that's, like I said, just because I didn't seal the holes right, and I didn't paint it after cutting the holes. I painted it before cutting the holes. I think I could have been more careful with that process and how I did it. So something that I've learned, if you're out there, you're thinking about using this method, I think it actually does work pretty well. It's definitely easier than doing poor man's fiberglass or actually working with actual fiberglass. Maybe at some point I experiment with those methods instead, but you know, for what it's worth, it has worked pretty well, but you just got to be careful about those holes that you cut inside, you know, the walls of your camper. Overall, like structurally, the camper's held up pretty well. I really haven't noticed any issues. I mean, obviously, it's still young, relatively speaking. It hasn't been a decade or anything like that, but seems to be doing okay. One thing that I would have changed about the insulation on this camper, if I do this again, the tub of the camper, I simply did not insulate enough. I have a good amount in the walls. Like I said, it's got like 1 inch in the walls, but on the tub, I only have a 1/2 inch because it's just what I had left over. And then for the actual wings, it's only 1/2 inch plywood, and there is actually no insulation on the wings of this camper. So this section here and then on the other side, and they get pretty hot. If the sun is beating on one side of this camper, I mean, it feels very hot to touch the plywood. So if I do this again, one thing I'm definitely going to do, another thing that I'm definitely going to do is going to be to try to insulate the tub and the floor very well, and at least try to match it to the amount of insulation that I use in the walls and in the ceiling. I'd say overall, those are the biggest mistakes with the exterior, things that I would maybe do differently or just be very, very mindful of if I were to do another camper again. Another thing that I'll probably do in the future is make it taller and actually make it so I can stand up inside. I can get like almost standing, like I'm kind of like this a little bit. I have to like hunch a tiny bit. I think it would have been nice to have the extra foot of standing room in there, it wouldn't have made a whole lot of difference. You know, with this camper, one thing that is good is that it is small, it's compact, and it doesn't really negatively impact my gas mileage. I know I've talked about that in a couple of previous videos. I thought it would be way worse than it is. I could get almost 14 miles to the gallon, and that's about what I was getting with nothing in the bed of the truck. I think that that's just because it's lightweight and because it's relatively compact, and it's worked out. But in the future, if I do another one, I will probably make it so that I can stand, and I will probably do a small cab over bed section so that I can get more space in the back for, you know, a little kitchen area and just a better desk setup. But overall, like, I'm very happy with the interior of this build. One thing I want to talk about the interior is the white paint on the walls. I love using white paint because it makes it so that it's this like beautiful, open, like airy space. It makes it feel a lot bigger than it actually is when you use white light paints like that. But if you are building a camper, something to think about is that white paint scuffs super easily to the point where I just have scuffs like all over the walls in there. I don't even know where some of them came from. Like, there's just marks all over the place. And that's just because I use, you know, pure white paint, the cotton knit white from Bayer there, which I like. I've used it in a bunch of different builds and I think it's beautiful, but you got to touch it up pretty often because it gets really messed up. So if anyone has suggestions for how to make your white paint not scuff inside a camper, I'm all ears for hearing the suggestions on that one. Something to think about if you're building your own camper. But other than that, I mean, the interior, the power system, the solar, the, you know, the AC, the air conditioning unit, that worked wonderfully all summer. You know, the desk setup works pretty well. It's relatively comfortable. The bed is super comfortable. It's just a twin size bed, but it's very, very cozy. The surfboard mount that I have on the wall has worked really well. I actually modified that recently to make it sit even closer to the wall, so that's worked out. And I love the porthole windows as well. Another thing that I really like about this build, those little porthole windows were amazing. They were super cheap, and they haven't leaked. They've been pretty good overall, and from that standpoint. But then I just like that you can open them up. I built a little custom screen for the front one, and then putting that vent fan directly across on the wall on the back side of the camper has been amazing. Getting that cross breeze through there, I know I've talked about this in a couple of previous videos, but having that cross breeze works wonders to keep me cool, even on some of the hottest days here in Florida. So that's another thing that I think worked out really well. I do have some plans for the future. Next video coming up within the next few weeks, I'm going to be remodeling the interior a little bit. I want to add some cabinets. I'm going to be relocating my fridge, actually getting a new fridge, which I'm really excited about, and just sort of changing up the interior, trying to maximize that space, make it a little bit more efficient in there. So I'm looking forward to reconfiguring that, doing a little remodel, and then seeing how it goes. But that'll all be part of the next video. If you haven't seen some of the videos about this build, I'll link to one right here so you can check it out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you all again soon.